Good afternoon. Welcome to the Moshan Center for International Security Studies. My name is Eric Nisbet. I am an associate professor in the School of Communication and a Moshan Center faculty affiliate here. I also have a Christie appointment in political science. I'm really pleased to introduce a collaborator of mine now for several years. We first met face-to-face in Marrakesh 4 years ago at a comparative national elections project meeting that he is also a partner with, along with myself, with Dick and Paul. He's going to talk to you today about some research that he's been doing in Turkey. Sorry, I should say your name first. Ali Çarkoğlu. His paper is on public attitudes towards the use of force abroad and experimental analysis. Ali is a professor of international relations at Koç University in Istanbul, Turkey. His recent research focuses on voting behavior, party systems and political parties, religiosity, social capital, public opinion, Turkish politics. He's worked with me on internet freedom and online political expression. So he has a very wide-ranging intellectual interest when it comes to politics and international security and comparative politics. Has been teaching comparative politics, public choice theory, voting behavior, Turkish politics. Is there anything you don't teach? Research design and methods, basic statistics and regression methods, and social network analysis. He has previously served as the dean of the College of Administrative Sciences and Economics at Koç. He holds a PhD in political science from SUNY Binghamton. And I also want to say on a personal note, because of our collaboration and the need to raise some extra money for our internet freedom survey in Turkey, he's the cause of me meeting my wife through University of Pennsylvania, and now my 10-month-old son. So thank you, Ali, for that as well, beyond any research publications, on a personal note. So please welcome and join me, Ali, to the Moshan Center. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for all the kind words. I can't claim any responsibility, but I remember the time when you visited and went to Vienna as well, so he was very enthusiastic, and so it's very good to be back here for this talk. I'm very thankful to the Moshan Center for providing this opportunity for me. This is a joint work with Belgin Şan Akça that we've been trying to explore the micro foundations of foreign policy in as much an experimental setting as possible. This is a difficult line of research because at the time of the field work there might not be many things going on in the international crisis scene, and the issue that you want to explore might not be a very salient issue for the layman. The average education of our samples is around 6-7 years in Turkey. So when you talk to them about foreign policy options in a time when this is not on the agenda at all, you might not get very sensible answers. So motivating this line of research within a survey setting is not easy. But Turkey is a very odd country. We always pride ourselves for not being boring at all. So many things happen all the time. And we had a streak of survey fieldworks that followed one after another in 2015. Wherein we tried a number of different ways to address this problem. And it gave us an interesting opportunity. Oops, did I do that? No, okay, fine. All right. I was just trying to get my pictures. So these three gentlemen, whom you probably know very well, Um, Putin and Erdogan has a lot in common, and I will talk a little bit about the motivation that they provided for us. I also put Trump there because he enlightens all our scientific work nowadays. And as a president of the U.S., he has lots of responsibility for getting involved or staying out of international conflicts, obviously, and having to take into account the public perspective on these interventions obviously matters a lot for American presidents, and the scholarship in this area has always taken an American perspective anyways. So one of our contributions, hopefully, is to introduce a non-American setting into this picture, and not necessarily a very democratic setting. Why? Because, for instance, the ousting of the Ukrainian president in 2015 by what is perceived as Russian aggression to annex Crimea brought about a series of domino effects where the borders can now be changed after the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and the dynamics that led to that intervention is one of the prime motivations for our study, because Russia always used this ethnic kin argument in their intervention. Similarly, Turkey's Operation Euphrates Shield, you might not recognize this at all. This is different than the most recent intervention of Turkey in Syria, but this was again in Syria, but primarily justified on the grounds of protecting the Turkmens in the Syrian-Turkey border. So the two commonalities between these examples of Putin and Erdogan is not only that they are very highly popular and very active leaders in the international scene, but also they mobilize mass support behind their policies, especially when it comes to foreign policy, and especially using force abroad. Putin did that, Erdogan does that all the time, and most important critical piece of reasoning behind these interventions is not only the security concerns and the strategic importance of the regions in question, but also they emphasize there are people over there, our brothers and sisters, our ethnic kin basically, that provides justification for intervention. So this has been on the agenda since Weiner's early 70s contribution on transnational ethnic kin being a factor in creating international conflict. This is the so-called Macedonian syndrome. In order to protect their ethnic kin living within the borders of other states, nation states have had the opportunity to intervene and use force to achieve these objectives. So internal conflicts of other states provides these opportunities for different states. So in terms of supporting protesters, insurgent groups, or providing them safe havens, providing them weapons, or directly use force to fight side by side with their ethnic kin. Um, the empirical findings using cross-sectional macro-level IR data have always supported and validated these arguments, but there isn't much of a micro-level analysis as to what kind of dynamics within a nation state provides this opportunity for a leader to intervene in another state's internal conflicts on behalf of a group with which they feel they have some ethnic proximity and ethnic kin relationship. So that's where our research hopes to contribute. Most of the research in the past have looked into advanced democracies like the UK, Germany, and the US intervening abroad, but not in other country settings. And one theoretical approach is the so-called utility-based explanations. So wherever an intervention is at stake, the mission claims to have a utility-bringing objective, like building a nation, deterring other aggressions from relevant states, or having a humanitarian aid provided in different states. The other explanation is more intangible or so-called value-based explanations. You know, shared values, morality, religious links, or conservative universalist ideological commitments might actually render a state more likely to intervene on behalf of another group in a different state. Our research contributes, first of all, bringing Turkey into this picture, but also we want to create a hypothetical context where an internal conflict within another state creates a security concern for the country in question, that is Turkey, necessitating some kind of foreign policy action, and bring direct micro-foundational dimensions into the picture and take into account the ideological leanings and identity perceptions of individuals and how their support for foreign policy intervention is impacted by that. So we tend to think that the Middle East provides ample opportunity for this kind of action, for this kind of research. And it might also have a practical, more policy-oriented knowledge in the sense of providing some information as to what is likely, what types of conflicts are likely to create a situation for active military engagement in places like Turkey. Okay. So we specifically create a vignette where we discuss, we describe internal instability in a neighboring country with a government and a group of protesters. Hint, hint, for Turkey, this is obviously Syria, but this had been the case in Bulgaria, only about a decade or two, well, it was 1985, more than 2 decades, but Turkey has lived this before with Bulgaria, and now it's going through with the same situation with Syria. So we also bring both macro level perspectives as well as micro level perspectives into this. So our hypotheses, let me give them all in one page to save time. These are all almost very primitive expectations, but theoretically they have not been directly tested in the literature yet. So individual citizens are more likely to support protesters if the protesters have democratic claims as opposed to unspecified claims. Individuals will support more action supportive of protesters who are perceived to be their ethnic kin, and if the military capacity is perceived to be higher, the likelihood of intervention or hawkish foreign policy support is likely to be higher. And if there is also perceived threat of aggression, then likelihood of activism on the foreign policy perspective is higher. And utility, if the perceived utility is higher for a given foreign policy choice, then support for it will be higher, obviously. So our research design, I didn't change the title. This is not stating that an experimental approach. It became an experimental research, or it took the shape of an experiment, not by design, but by along the way when we were developing this, we found out that there is an opportunity to turn this into an experiment. Basically, we started out asking 3 basic questions. The first one in the survey, the first survey at the end of 2014 and beginning of 2015. This is the one that we did with Eric on post-presidential election. The CNEP data also was collected in this round, where we asked, with a vignette, that we gave the scenario of a conflict in a neighboring country, and asked utility evaluations from individuals, followed by a question about which one of these 3 are you more likely to choose. So they first read the vignette of the setup, which I will read in a moment. Then they made utility evaluations for each of the policy options. One option being, just closing the borders and putting economic sanctions in effect. The other one is supporting the rebels or protesters. And the third one is the actual use of force. And then, which one among the 3 are you more likely to choose? So we asked the same. We had another opportunity to ask these questions in the post-election survey of 2015, when we also contemplated to ask about ethnic kin. So following the first three questions, we actually gave another statement saying that, now assume that the protesters are your ethnic kin. Which policy option would you choose targeting this group now? And in the third one, this is after the November election, we also wanted to test whether or not taking out the democratic claims qualifier in the first vignette that we present to the respondents would make a significant difference. So we took that out and asked the same questions that we asked in the second survey. So when we actually test, or I will present the test of democratic treatment effects, we will be comparing the first and second survey as opposed to the third survey. And when we actually test for ethnic kin treatment, we will compare the row C with row E. As well as comparing the first survey with the second and third. So it gives us a number of different opportunities for testing both treatments. Okay, so in terms of our findings, the threat perception shifts significantly between the first and second and third. It significantly rises. The threat perception is increasing in the August, September, and November, December 2015. This is the time when the attacks primarily by the PKK, the Kurdish, what's the opening? Kurdish Workers' Party. This is the rebel group that Turkey is dealing with since early 80s. And together with the ISIS, the Iraq, Syria, Islamic State. Islamic State of Levant, yes. So both have conducted significant number of bombings and attacks to bombing of civilians as well as to attacks against Turkish military, which seems to have significantly pushed the threat perceptions. We asked this threat perception in two different ways. One is direct threat to Turkey. The other one, the light blue, is about individual perceived threat to one's lifestyle. Both seems to have increased, but as expected, perceptions against Turkey, the threat perceptions against the country is much more significantly higher in the second and the third survey. So this gives you a context as to the timing of the field works. So these are the pre-treatment vignettes. So imagine that there are demonstrations in a neighboring country wherein demands for a better democratic regime are expressed. In the second one, this is replaced by some demands alone instead of the complete better democratic regime. Then we continue. The leadership of the country uses oppressive measures leading to clashes between the security forces and demonstrators, which results in several killings from both sides. As a result, significant groups of people start fleeing into Turkey. Perceiving all of these developments as a threat to Turkey's security, the government has three alternative policy options. The Turkish government could close its borders with the neighboring country and start applying economic sanctions. This is what we call close border and apply economic sanctions option. The government could start supporting the protesters, or could declare that all possible military precautions will be taken, including all necessary uses of military force against the neighboring country's regime. So we don't specify the name of the country, but the setting is clearly suggestive of Syria. The wording is a little, now I look back at it 2.5 years later, we could have done this in a different way, but I think it communicates the main idea that we want to communicate. The only thing that changes between democratic treatment and non-democratic treatment is this demand, some demand versus demands for better democracy, and all the rest is the same. This is followed by this question: to what extent do you think that each of these policy options would be beneficial for Turkey? Between 0 and 10, they are supposed to give us their answers. And here are the results. Across the three, okay, all right. So in the first two, where we had democratic claims wording, we observe a rise in close borders and apply economic sanctions. It continues, and the difference between the second and the third even is significant. And it remains as the highest utility-bringing option among the three, followed by use of force. The support for protesters remain almost a distant third option. And we see that the same pattern of increase is observed across the second and the third, but their levels are different. So these two levels and these two levels would be of most interest for us. So the second question is, which one among the three you would prefer the most? And here are the results. In the first one, second one, and the third one, more than 50% of the population chooses close border among the three as their first choice. In the second one, the third option of use of force was about 23%. Then it declines down to 17, and remains around 17. This difference between the two doesn't appear to be significant. But the most interesting shift is, as we move from relatively peaceful setting into a period of attacks by PKK and ISIS, those who express no opinion significantly increases. So who are these people? First of all, I should underline that, these are women, less educated women, in general, as the education level rises, obviously providing some answer, likelihood of providing an answer actually increases. That's not a surprise. Rural-born people appear to be less likely to provide no answer, but then more likely. There is no pattern there. But metropolitan group, there is a pattern there. As the don't know answers increase, we see that they come primarily from non-metropolitan area residents. Also, I have to underline that, as we hit the high conflict period, Kurds start to shy away from providing an answer. And if they actually are AKP, CHP, or MHP voters, they are less likely to say don't knows. And if they are a supporter of the Kurdish party, they appear to be significantly more likely to say don't know. So this is the shortcoming of the data. We have 1 out of 5 individuals not answering our questions in the second and third surveys. So how did the voter perception of power change? As conflict increases or attacks increases in the country, the perception of power that the country has to deal with these issues appear to shift upwards. And in each and every one, we seem to have a significant slight rise. These are all evaluation between 0 and 10. One might also argue that although these are statistically significant shifts, qualitatively speaking, what does it mean to shift from 7.6 to 7.9? Well, it means very little. It's around the same level of perception. Okay, so the first test concerns the comparison between the first and second together against the third survey, and to test for democratic treatment. This is a multinomial logistic regression comparing all 3 options. The reference option is the least interventionist, just closing the border and applying economic sanctions. So any shift to support protesters and then to shift to use of force is a step up in the level of your reaction to this security threat. And the treatment seems to be working in the way we expect it to work. In the democracy treatment, it doesn't make a difference between the first and the second option available, from sanctions to supporting logistic support for the protesters. It doesn't make a significant shift at the conventional level, but at the 10% level it is significant still. But it makes a significant shift from economic sanctions to the use of force in the exactly expected positive way. For ethnic treatment, comparing the first and the second and third, for all options we observe a significant shift of about the same magnitude, positive shift, so making it more likely to support a higher level of reaction from economic sanction to active support for protesters, and to economic sanctions to the use of force. So our first 2 main hypotheses appear to be supported by this data. Another set of findings concern the utility evaluations of each and every one, and as expected, if you find the economic sanctions and closing border option of higher utility, obviously you switch from being supportive of protesters to the reference category of economic sanctions significantly, and support for protesters is positive, but also if you find use of force positive and utility-wise of value, it still has a, what is that called, a spillover effect into the other policy option of supporting protesters at a lower level of magnitude compared to its own level, but it still has a positive effect. It has the expected high magnitude positive effect for switching an individual from economic sanctions to use of force for democracy treatment, as well as for ethnic kin treatment. These are all significant effects. Is that a 6.5 or? So this is a mistake I made. This is not significant. So okay. So what seems to be happening here is that the highest level of intervention, especially, is affected by utility calculations. Okay. Economic evaluation. So if one is confident about the state of the economy, that individual is more likely to support higher levels of intervention for both democratic treatment as well as ethnic kin treatment, but not so at the highest level of intervention. Life satisfaction has a negative effect, meaning that if you are satisfied with your life, you don't want a higher level of intervention. So it looks like one is capturing the comfort level, the other one is capturing capability level. Economic evaluations captures capability, life satisfaction captures comfort level. Right wing is persistently associated with higher levels of intervention. That's very much in line with the Turkish conservative approach. Okay. So I think I covered everything else. The other findings are not consistent. So the second way of testing for ethnic kin treatment was to compare, actually, let me, it's not a good way of doing this, but, so I now have gone over comparing survey 1-2 with survey 3 and survey 2-3 with survey 1. But now I want to compare pre-treatment most preferred option choices and post-treatment most preferred option choices. If I can continue. Okay. So this is pre-treatment, pre-ethnic kin treatment preferences crossed up with post-ethnic kin treatments. And these are the individuals on the main diagonal giving the same answer in pre and post treatments. All right? So these are the people who are not affected by the treatment, basically. These individuals, these three cells, capture individuals who have a more hawkish position in the post-treatment evaluation compared to their pre-treatment choices. And these three yellow cells reflect choices of people who give a dovish answer in their post-treatment evaluations. And obviously, hawkish move is about 19% and more than double the size of the dovish move. So on the basis of basic cross-tabulation, it looks like ethnic treatment shifts people towards more hawkish positions. And in this one, I'm comparing rows C and D, and on the basis of this group of people specified as a binary variable, a dummy variable for the hawkish movers, as opposed to dovish movers. And who are those individuals? Basically, they appear to move not by threat perceptions, but by utility perceptions and power capability perceptions. And it looks like the dovish movers are, if they find the utility of use of force higher, then they are more likely to be a dovish mover and less likely to be hawkish. So that's a counterintuitive result to me. Right? So you would expect just the opposite. If you find the use of force utility significant and higher, I would expect higher levels of utility for use of force to shift somebody towards more hawkish position. It doesn't appear so. However, if you find support for protesters of higher utility, you are more hawkish, but insignificant for the dovish moves. And if you find the lowest level of reaction of higher utility, you are more likely to adopt a hawkish stand and less likely to adopt a dovish stand. I mean, if you look at this row versus this row, it actually corresponds to cross-tab results as well. So besides utility calculations, there doesn't seem to be a persistent result. In this one, I adopted the same specification, but added the pre-treatment answers as an explanatory variable for the post-treatment answers. And after controlling for your answers in the pre-treatment, still the utility calculations appear to be significantly shaping your preferences. That to me is again a surprising result. And this time, after controlling for pre-treatment answers, power capability perceptions appear to shift people from economic sanctions to use of force in a significant way. That actually is more fitting our expectations this time, but only after you take into account the pre-treatment answers. So these are practically people who change their options from pre to post. So the change in pre to post answers is more likely to be affected by power perceptions, but not when you only take into account the hawkish and dovish moves lumped all together.
Ali, did they answer the utility questions only once?
The utility question is pre-treatment, yes. Only
Pre-treatment,
once.
only once.
Yes. That might also be.
I mean, my question is whether they changed their view of the
The
utility.
utility as well, yes.
That
we
explain the
don't-
counterintuitive.
Yes, very good point, actually. Okay. The other interesting point is from the economic sanctions to supporting logistic support for protesters appears to be more affected by economic evaluations and life satisfaction and interest in politics. So more interested people appear to shift to one notch higher level of reaction, but not the highest level. And life satisfaction reflecting comfort, again, is negatively associated with the one notch higher level of reaction. And economic evaluations reflecting capability at the national level is positively linked to one notch higher likelihood of support. Okay, so that's it. We appear to find support for almost all, but not the threat option, and counter-intuitive result about power capability. Utility variables appear to function as we expect them to function. So that's, I think that's it, yes. Did I leave any time?
Yeah, time for questions.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, I have some questions, but I want you guys to go first, so I can ask them later. Questions? Comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just take this off?
We're kind of approaching the 100-year anniversary of the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Is there any nostalgia among any of the groups in Turkey?
Nostalgia for Ottoman Empire?
That would contribute to their interest in intervention, maybe?
Well, people have claimed that the AKP government, who is in power now, has a neo-Ottoman foreign policy. But I'm not sure. It might be one underlying factor for the public support for use of force. One thing that we didn't specify here, perhaps in the most strictest sense, is that we didn't specify the nature of ethnic kill. We actually thought that this could work both for Kurds looking into Syria, to Kobane and other places, as well as Turks looking into Syria and seeing the Turkmen minority there. But now I'm thinking within our sample, the Kurds comprise 18% or so. So we might be better off if we specified two different ethnic kills and differentiated between Turks and Kurds, reacting to Kurds and Turks on the other side of the border. But that would have made the whole design more explicit, and we would have to specify that this is Syria we're talking about. And we were afraid that that's going to have issues in the field as well. I mean, more candidly, I was afraid that in the field asking questions about the ongoing debate in Syria might have created reactions.
Chris?
I had a question about the sort of counterintuitive result about, if I understood it correctly, folks who had relatively high utility for the sort of more hawkish policies responded less in terms of becoming more hawkish than to the kin cube than to others. And I'm wondering if that could be due to a ceiling effect, that those are people who are already, right, if you've already got a high utility for using sanctions and force, that you're already giving that response.
Yeah.
So you see the kin cube pushing the other groups more, not because they're acting against their utility, but because the other folks have already reached that. They've already reached that threshold and they're already supporting force, and these are basically the people with the room left to move in response to that cue.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
a very good point, yes.
So you can test that looking at the means, right? See if there's a ceiling effect on that.
Yeah, we can run the same equation for two different groups, basically, if I understand it correctly. So differentiate people with lower power perception, power capability perception, as opposed to higher.
Well, what was the mean for the utility use of force? Do you have that?
Yes. Mean
Compare the means for the other two.
Yeah,
You say that the means for utility of force is so high that it couldn't move that much.
Use of force utility is actually 5 to 6 out of 10. It's not very high. But for some people, I mean, for AKP people, this could be 6.5.
But if suppose everybody who's got a utility above 5 or something like that is then going to say, let's use force, then in your second analysis, all those people, they're already going to be in that use force category, and it's only the other two categories who
Actually move.
could respond, because you've just got these three categories, right? You can't push them, so you've got this continuous measure of utility, but your outcome measure has got three categories, and once you're in the top
Yes,
category,
yes.
you can't observe any more
Yeah.
So the
movement.
question is mean by category pre-treatment.
Pre-treatment,
Yeah.
Right. And then you might see a ceiling effect where it's just really high in that one category, so you can't really move.
But-
Just as a diagnostic.
But in this very last analysis, if I can, I shouldn't be doing this. Yes, in this case, that's, your explanation might be driving this. But in this case, right? Yes, before treatment, this actually does take into account their before treatment.
That's the before treatment, not preference.
That's their before treatment dummy variable. If they chosen close border,
Right.
they are here. If they chose support protesters, they are here, and this one, they are here. So in this one, after having those preferences taken into account, the utility of use of force actually is corrected. So it's no longer negative. Whereas in the
It's
first
still
one,
negative, like the before treatment, use of force. Oh, I see, once you,
this is only for use of force, but it is not shifting from economic sanctions to use of force, but rather to support protesters. So obviously,
So, but once you put the before treatment use of force is positive for shifting people
Yes.
from economic sanctions
to the use of force.
to use of force.
So this actually does take into account your ceiling
I
effect
see.
because the ceiling effect is here actually, and that's positive, right? If I
I think
So-
so. I think so.
instead of doing I mean, I was tempted to do this, hawkish doish, because it's the simplest thing to understand these shifts, these and these.
Within subjects, yeah, within
Within subject,
the
yes.
subject shift.
However, you are right that, you know, if you are already here,
You can't go.
you can't go any higher. And that has to take into account where you were. So the pre-treatment has to be taken into account. So we should present this perhaps, but don't conduct this analysis, I think. I mean, yes,
I'm
please.
surprised that partisanship is not a significant factor here, since this is really sort of an Erdogan foreign policy. Why isn't that polarizing across parties?
I mean, let's not take this into account, but over here, across the board, actually, there is no persistent pattern. My hunch is that this is a complicated issue, foreign policy, and it only is correlated to utility calculations and threat, but not partisanship. That's, I mean, it appears that, you know, the partisan signals doesn't seem to make much sense among the people.
Well, it could also be that some of the other covariates you have in the analysis are sucking out the, like, economic evaluations, life satisfaction, interest in politics, philosophy.
Well, economic evaluations are definitely partisan. I mean, here the positive
Yeah.
views are AKP, negative views are opposition. It may make sense not to include both at the same time.
Or you can see, you can put them in as blocks and see if
Yeah.
one is mediated out by the
Yeah,
other,
right.
right? Do you think that life satisfaction is a proxy for basically being risk averse? So that, you know, people are
Yeah.
risk averse in general, right? And so that if you're satisfied with your
Yeah.
life, you're less likely to want to risk.
I said comfort factor, but
Yeah.
that
Yeah, same
corresponds
idea.
to risk
Yeah.
aversion.
So one takeaway from your presentation is that people, the more satisfied with your life, you're less likely to support intervention.
Yes, yeah. That's what it looks like here. But also, more satisfied people are more likely to be AKP supporters as well.
But
So
this is
that's-
life satisfaction. Is it just a measure? Are you how satisfied you are with your life, generally
Right,
speaking?
yes, yes. Happiness measure.
Happy.
Yes, wouldn't recent changes in Turkish policy be able to skew this considerably? I mean, they were, to the degree that they were intervening militarily, it was against ISIS back at the time of your study.
Yes.
Now it's against Kurds.
Kurds.
And linking the Kurds in Syria to the Kurds, which within Turkey, and they're about 20%.
18, 20 years.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the nature of intervention today is completely different. And the extent of activity also is completely different. In the first one, they stayed in for maybe 2 weeks, 2.5, 3 weeks. Now they've been there for more than 6 weeks. And they claim to have neutralized, as they say, 3,700 terrorists, and every day the Prime Minister and the President gives the count. It's such a strange setting, to say the least. I cannot believe that in Vietnam, the President given the number of people not only killed on the other side, but also on the side of the Americans. And this is the state of war mentality has completely uncivilized the whole setting.
Ali, I'm surprised a bit by how modest the effects are of the treatments.
Yes.
Could you strengthen the treatments in a way that would make them more robust, or do you think that these are just modest effects of these particular variables?
Well, in terms of magnitude, I did not show the magnitude evaluation. I didn't have time to look into that yet. But I also suspect that they are not huge effects. My hunch is that still, I mean, these treatments are subtle treatments. And when you make them too forceful, then you create a situation where the differences are either too great that, or pre and post are not that different. You hit a ceiling effect. I'm not sure.
But you shifted
How?
20% of the sample, right? 20% of the participants shifted?
Well, that's the crosstab, yes.
So, I mean, that's a pretty big,
20%.
for someone who does experiments, that's a big effect size in the shift.
Not only 20%, the shift is 28%.
Well, you may have a reversion of the mean, right? So it's hard to tell because you have either way, but 20% became more hawkish after the time, right? Is that how it?
Well,
But you would expect a shift in a single direction, right?
well, it shifts in both directions.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But it shifts mostly in one. It's the
Yeah, more in one in the first than in the second. Well, I'm not actually sure who these people are.
become more dovish.
Dovish, yeah, because I mean that's why I ran this analysis.
Yeah.
In terms of the demographics, there is no real pattern. They are not MHP voters. That's to be expected. These are nationalists. So the dovish movers are not nationalists. That we know. And they appear to be more higher educated people. That also fits our expectations. So lower educated, non-nationalist party voters whose economic evaluations are better than average, let's say.
Is that an economic evaluation of that sociotrope personal?
Yeah.
Or
All five evaluations summed up into one
I was
scale.
wondering if you took out personal from society, whether that would make a difference.
Yeah, that's also, that's one thing I should.
It's because like personal, but also
Why
might
should-
to life sasatisfaction, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that might be one dimension versus the.
Yeah. Why should we include the pocketbook personal, right? I should do that.
Other questions? Or comments?
Let me ask a more political one. If you were advising Erdogan
Thank God
on
I'm
how
not.
he should frame, if you were.
Okay. Hypothetical question.
If you were advising him on how to frame his approach to these kinds of commitments of force abroad, based on the results of your study, what would you tell him?
He shouldn't intervene when the economy is bad, first. But I think that's obvious to him as well. And he should not be worried about partisanship, with the exception of perhaps the nationalists. And it's important that he manipulates the media, because these utility and power capability perceptions are directly affected by the media.
So it's almost like an indirect effect. Like, so in your analysis, could you actually look at the indirect effect through utility on some of this through the media
Yes.
discourse as well?
Yeah.
Like another way to look at
Yes.
it too. Talk about that.
I think we can actually measure how these conflicts are covered by the media and show how the leadership is different in their utility and power evaluations. That would be interesting. But now what's the big issue on the agenda in Turkey is the media ownership structure has completely shifted in the last couple of days.
Ali, I was thinking, as someone who's done some research in Russia, and actually I did an experiment, somewhat different, but the same idea, looking at support for Crimea annexation among Russians, a priming experiment. how would you generalize this to a Russian context that obviously has ethnic kin on its periphery? You think about Ukraine, think about what's going on in eastern Ukraine. Or could you generalize this experimental approach or these findings to the Russian context in a way?
Whoever is the ethnic kin on the other side appears to have an impact on the way the domestic constituency sees the foreign policy action. So that's, I think, from that perspective, our research is fulfilling our expectations. But I am not 100% satisfied with the way the ethnic kin is actually treated in the experiment, because we left it ambiguously defined.
So if we did it, like say we were going to replicate this in Russia, right?
So yeah, I would think if you have no constraints whatsoever, like budget constraints and all that, try a general definition as opposed to more specific definition of ethnic kin, and see about how much of a difference that makes. Because it might be that once you turn that into a more specific ethnic kin treatment, the magnitudes might be much higher or not very high. Because the Turks might be thinking of a hypothetical ethnic kin. If you don't name it, they might think that these are really Turks on the other side. These are not Turks. These are the Turkmens, whom you never spoken to, whom you never saw. These are only 10,000, maybe less than 100,000 people. Are you willing to fight a war for the Turkmens? So let's make that specific. Then maybe the Turks' reactions might be lower. But if you make it the ethnic kin, should Turkey fight a war against the Kurdish protesters on the other side, who might actually fight for an autonomy within Syria, like this is the operation now, then they might be more willing to support.
Well, I'm just thinking about in Russia, where you have Russian speakers and ethnic Russians in Ukraine, for example, or if you're going to do this, say, use the Balkans or Kazakhstan or Georgia, where there's sizable Russian-speaking populations, how would you replicate it or look at that? How would it generalize to Russia as well? The other thing is, in terms of options, one of the options that Russia employs is this in-between option. They're giving support, and military support, but not overtly, right? It's sort of this like hybrid sort of, like they're the Russian military on leave, right? Just happen to go to Ukraine with their weapons to fight, right? So like there's this in-between, or they're using mercenary outfits in Syria, right? So it's just interesting. It'll be interesting to look at how you would look at the Russian versus the Syrian intervention, right?
Sure.
Intervention in Russia. I was just thinking, give me all kinds of ideas you could do actually. In the Russian context.
We are, how should I put it, motivating the article on the basis of Russian intervention in Ukraine.
Yeah.
The Turkish example is not that drastic in its measures.
Yeah.
So the first intervened for a couple of weeks and then
Got out.
pulled back. And this intervention that is underway is not fitting into our example.
Yeah.
So the Ukrainian case is the typical case. Or the Moldavians.
There we have Russian troops.
Or the Hungarians in Romania. But they are yet to fight a war over it.
It'd be interesting to do a bunch of different, do Hungary, do Russia.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.